Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of global legal law firm, ISOs, fintech, PayFacs, agents, merchants, processors, acquiring banks, and card brands. If these terms mean something to you, this podcast is for you. If these terms aren't so familiar, this podcast is even more for you. We hope you enjoy this episode of PEP, the Payments Experts Podcast. Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of global legal law firm. Today, we are very fortunate to have in studio with us the founding and managing partner of global legal law firm, Christopher Dryden, as well as Steve Taylor of Taylor Brands POS. Steve, it's wonderful to have you with us today. We've got a lot of important things to talk about. And would you mind giving us a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, for the purpose of this, American Disabilities Act and the technology of assistive technology, specifically in the mounting for stores, attended, self-checkout and unattended, along with the new laws coming into place. I'm not going to go through my whole background. That's on the website if you want to go look at it. But
give us the
for
website.
The purpose of taylorpos.com.
Perfect.
Now, you can think of point of sale, it's point of service combined, sort of. But, with what we do, it's more of a mounting service than it is just go by this stand. There's a lot more to it. And
hey, Steve, real quick, let's back up because I can't remember how you found us, or because I think you called and I can't remember exactly, but this is a really interesting subject matter for me because I think it's highly relevant to a lot of the people that we represent. I think at least when I examine something, it's really good to understand the history associated with it and kind of, the background. I'm familiar with the ADA, just being a lawyer and being in California, an extremely litigious state, and people doing drive-bys of trying to find violations of the ADA. There were attorney firms here in San Diego that were trying to, find violations because there's attorney's fees attached to the violations. And so if you write a demand letter and yada, 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 then potentially you are entitled to attorney's fees, and then there are remedial measures that need to take place under the ADA. That's usually for accessibility. That was when I first became a lawyer, I saw stuff like that. I've been in payments for a really long time. The fact that the ADA would now intersect with payments and that there would be not only ADA provisions, but also California-specific provisions. When you contacted me, I found that to be a highly interesting, because it impacts almost every single merchant that has a physical storefront. And B, it's a value add sale to almost get it, I don't know if I'd call it a loss leader, but to get the foot in the door to talk to a merchant, to get them talking about payment processing and an agent's knowledge associated with it. I found it very, very interesting and very relevant. So I think if you could give some background associated with kind of just, because I was surprised to learn that this had been on the books for such a long time, but I've never been exposed to it. And I think from that perspective, it's really important that people understand that this is out there. And so I just, give us a background associated with the legislation, because I think that it's one of those things that's really going to become far more relevant because it's going to get out into the light. And I think one that's good for what you sell, but it's also good for building relationships with merchants for salespeople that are offering merchant services.
Yeah. So in 2013, the U.S. Access Board did put out an ANPRM, Advance Notice Proposed Rulemaking, for POS. They weren't quite ready. They put it on the shelf in 2014. I don't know all the reasons why. They reattempted in 2017 to make checkouts more accessible. Trump got in and said for every new regulation, you got to remove 2. So it was stumped for 4 years. They had to drop it. And when the new administration came in, they hit it again and said, gosh, we have a big self-checkout shift, and we have to make sure people in wheelchairs, little people, or just with other problems, could be as much as carpal tunnel, for crying out loud, that needed to be addressed. So that's exactly what's happening. And like I said, it's going to affect everything. There's a lot of cashiers that will ask for a person's debit card. If that's what they're running, they'll ask for their PIN because they can't access the point of sale device. Whose fault is that? I'm going to say it's the merchant services industry and the POS equipment distributors. The merchant's not going to know. They're expecting their payments professional to educate them. How can I properly be set up? And I always bring up the point, why would you have accessible parking spot, accessible entry and exit, accessible restroom, accessible aisle, accessible table, and inaccessible mounting? Make that make sense to me.
It's a great point, Steve.
Yeah. So if I go into my local Jack in the Box, I'm going to call that a 50/50 store. They have accessible parking. They have 2 spots. They just repaved. So you got to think about even the paving in a parking lot for people with walkers, right? You have a big old bumpy parking lot, it's going to give that person a really hard time. But if you park on the left side and you can't back in, you're pulling up next against a curb and bushes. What's the point of that accessible parking if you're the person in the wheelchair driving? It doesn't make sense, right? But then they have the bigger one where it's van accessible. You go on into the store, they got nice low counters, but their point of sale devices are tucked back and they're fixed mounted. And I'll go into fixed mounting and all that with this new NPRM coming up. But if you're in a wheelchair and you go to reach the straws or try and get a soda and you have limited reach and strength, you're out of luck.
So Steve, what's the disconnect then? Because you make a great point, right? These businesses, these merchants, they are required, even contractors, right? They are required to follow certain regulations to make these things happen, such as ramps, et cetera. Why is this not transferred over into the payment space?
I was talking with somebody about this the other day. They said because it wasn't originally involved in the ADA from the onset. Right.
Yeah, so I think it's a lack of knowledge too. I mean, I feel like I'm fairly knowledgeable in a lot of the areas of the law. And this was a total surprise to me that this was the ADA was applied to this particular this operation, right? I mean, it raises a question to me as well with the changing of just not point of service. I mean, I was in the airport the other day and it looks like McDonald's has gone to kiosks, and that seems to be something too. So there's a lot of different ordering and payment apparatus, but I don't think people know. That's why I was very interested to have you on.
Yeah.
Because I thought that this was very educational more than anything else to make sure that people understood that this was out there, because enforcement's going to happen at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the first things we can look at, it's very, just like the payments industry, very segmented. So the reasons behind it are many. If you look at, Jeremy, I sent you an email about the transaction acceptance guide, right? Device guide.
Mm-hmm.
If you accept Visa card, they require you to have accessibility for your point of sale device in whatever part of the world you are. It's TADG version 3.2 came out in January 2020, and it's section 2.6. So you can look that up. It's right there in your face. Okay, I accept Visa. Now I promise to abide by accessibility laws. Okay, payments professional, educate me.
It's interesting too, is there's certified payment professional classes through the ETA. I don't even know if they're aware of this.
No, they actually are. I take that back.
Do you know if it's part of the curriculum, Steve?
Not the curriculum. I joined in 2017 so I could do the show, the ETA show at Mandalay Bay. It was about 5 months before the shootings happened there. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a year. And we talked about it. In fact, we had a multi-person phone call on this, and they just, in my opinion, did not want to listen. They didn't want to hear it. They separate from the ADA for some reason, but yet it's a really integral part of it. You know, and I know if I own a store, well, again, I'll go back. I'm going to have the accessible parking, entry and exit, a counter. I'm going to give my customer a way to be able to privately interact with that device. You know, but the problem is also the mounting companies out there. They think in terms of it's got to stay stuck. PCI says it has to be locked down. Okay, if that's true, why do we have handhelds?
No, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. And in the PCI point of interaction section under PIN transaction security, it specifically talks about handhelds at ATMs. It's in black and white.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big area my first understanding of how the ADA intersected with payments was the ATM machines, because that was a source of a lot of litigation back in, like, I want to say 2010, 2011, whenever, you saw kind of a little bit of a thrust. I'm also interested in your opinion because, self-checkout's been something that's sort of, risen steadily over the last few years, but then recently, based on, the loss of related to shoplifting, and I don't know how much revenue goes out the door, by forcing people into the self-checkout line, and whether the loss there is offset by the savings in employees or whatever, whatever it is that they were trying to accomplish with self-checkout. I didn't even think about that until you had said that here, because I'm always thinking about going through the checkout line. I generally go through the checkout line just because I do. I don't know why, if it's habit, and I hate the idea that I'm being forced to go and commit labor to buy stuff from you. So, I on principle, a lot of times I'll just sit and kind of go through the checkout line. But what's your thought process on automated checkout and how that's going to look with the ADA compliance as well?
Yeah, so this one's funny to me because the Walmart, for instance, the self-checkouts there, they have a bar wand, right? A barcoder wand, and you can get it in your hand. You can scan all your product. You're sitting in your little scooter or on your wheelchair, and you hang it back up, but you can't reach the point of sale device. Make that make sense. Where is the logic? Why did NCR do this?
That's the thing. I don't think that this has really been in the forefront of anybody's mind, because I think if they saw the potential liability associated with it, I don't think they would ignore it.
Yeah, had I chosen to become a serial filer, I'd be worth millions upon millions just in settlements alone. And I would challenge any, no offense, guys, any attorney to fight me in court on it. I'll win every single time.
Well, it's black and white, right? I mean, the laws, I don't think that there's a lot of wiggle room in a statutory framework like the ADA.
Yeah, there isn't. And, a lot of people rely on this old myth called reach and range. Okay, it just needs to be within reach and range, and there's dimensions for that in the ADA. However, that's not the key. It's the assistive technology within the reach and range is what matters. And there are things in play for assistive technology. In the case of the mounting that I make, my patented technology, it has the operable part in ADA section 3.9. And there's 394. Anyway, I've got so many numbers in my head. I've been studying new stuff. I'll talk about it actually. But in that is the operation. So requiring no pinching, no twisting of the wrist, no grasping. The release has to be under a certain amount of pound strength, and to snap it back in, you have to think about, what's the term? distal radius volar tilt. And you're like, what's distal radial
Yeah.
volar tilt,
I was
right?
actually going to say, do you happen to have a POS ADA compliance guide for dummies?
I know, I thought about writing a book on it.
Yeah, totally. Because well, that's the thing about your website, right? I mean, you've got
Yeah,
educational materials that are up on it, and I'm sure that there's some of this is, watered down for people to just take it on, naturally,
yes,
versus because trust me, I when I first started, I used to do personal injury, and I used to read doctors and chiropractor notes, and I had to go and actually look up the stuff that I was reading because I really didn't understand any of it. So,
yeah. Well, with the distal radial, you got to think about alignment of the wrist usage. Again, I used the word, what was that earlier that people get with their wrist?
carpal
Carpal
tunnel.
tunnel. My mother had it.
Carpal
Yep.
tunnel, and you got to think about, did they have broken bones? Do they have, or do they have two fingers? Can they stretch? So little things like that matter. If you're going to go 360, you go 360. You don't go 359
So,
in
Steve,
your thought process.
let me ask you this. I'll play devil's advocate for a little bit here. You guys are familiar with the Amazon stores that have recently come out where you literally just walk in, you have an account set up, you put what you want in a basket and you walk
Yep.
out the door, and the technology is such that it charges your account. What do you
Yeah.
say to people who say, hey, look, technology is going to take care of this, kind of no big deal. Even now, you can just kind of tap your card against the POS. What's your response to people that say those sorts of things?
Oh, okay. So that works for some people, and some people are privacy oriented and say, no way. So you have to have choices. And I'll give you a good example. Saturday, I went to fill up my car at the Chevron, and I used their phone app. Okay. I didn't have to mess with the card reader there. It just synced up with the thing, and my card info was on. I think it's fantastic. It's awesome, but it's not for everybody, is it? Or if you're in an area with no cell signal, it's not going to work out too well.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I'm one of those people. It's funny to me that I'm in such a technology-driven space, and at the same time, like people try to communicate with me through text and email in the
Hmm.
same day, and I'm like, look, I'm not on my phone. Like I put it away.
Yeah.
It's a distraction. Like when
Yep.
I'm working, and so I don't get involved in a lot of the gadgetry with phones. I really don't care. Like when I'm away from working, I throw the thing away. It doesn't like that's just me, and I agree with you. There
Yeah.
is going to be a section of the population that's never really going to adopt. Now, as that section of the population grows old and dies, like
Right. Right.
I do believe that the ADA compliance technology will probably create solutions that don't require as much. And even then, I still think that there's going to be people that just aren't really
Yeah.
in that space. And so there's always going to
Yeah.
be some consumer that is going to want to do it old school unless it's mandated that they do it new school. And I don't know if merchants will become that sophisticated because I don't think, and I don't say this disparagingly at all, I just don't think that there are a lot of sophisticated business owners. I mean, I do believe that technology is pushing business education and tools. I think POS devices themselves, not terminals, but actual POS systems, have helped business owners educate themselves on software solutions for business. And I do
You
believe
know,
that there's been a continuing crescendo in that direction, but will there always be adoption? I mean, go into any convenience store and most people like it's just the terminal there and
Yep.
they're not really willing to invest in all that and they
The
don't
same
care.
terminal that was there 10 years ago.
Probably,
Pretty
right?
much,
Yeah,
yeah.
probably. And they work on such tight margins, they're not necessarily interested in having anything sophisticated in there because their business may not require it except for maybe inventory management. And
yeah.
yeah,
Well, I don't think going out getting a regular Verifone, Pax, Ingenico, or whatever is that much money, right? A few $100, and get your mounting. You get a 50% tax credit if you're a mil five under. I think it's 2.5 million now. The fines also went up with the ADA to 75,000 starting point. That'll take a business right out of business. Most, small business. But like I think I talked about this taco joint once I go to, and they have a clover set up and no tactile pin. And I asked them, I go, how would a blind person check out here if they were debit only? And their answer was, we don't get blind people.
That I actually think that too is an interesting, using Jeremy's analogy for Amazon, and like there's a certain section of people that qualify as a protected class under the ADA that none of this technology will ever apply, right? I mean, like there's some of that stuff that just how does a blind person take advantage of the technology unless somebody's adopting it for them? Like, and I don't know what segment of the population is out there that's blind and buying stuff, and I don't know the numbers or anything on that, but I also think that merchant at the taco shop is extremely foolish to not think that potentially would happen to them, or that some slimeball attorney would just send a blind person in to create a violation, right?
Yeah.
Do you need the address of that taco shop, Chris?
I know. There was a woman in San Diego back in, I want to say around 2017, literally in San Diego, mom and pop Mexican restaurant, and a scumbag lawyer, as you call him, had a guy in a wheelchair go in and measure the toilet roll paper holder. It was an inch and a half too high. That took her out of business.
Yeah, totally. And that stuff exists. That's why I'm saying, like, ADA attorneys and I'm a business lawyer and I want to do things that promote business. And that's part of the impetus to have you here, is because I think that this is actually a very simple fix.
Yes.
Where it's very cost effective and very simple, and the solution expense versus the actual liability expense, if you had that particular instance happen, they're so far out of whack with one another. That's why I thought this is really important. This is something that every merchant could use, and it's very cost effective. And if I was a salesperson walking in and I was talking to you about things that could be potentially harmful to your business that you're not even aware of, it just builds rapport, right? I mean, it allows you to walk in and talk to somebody and start a conversation and give them information and just go and even say, hey, by the way, like if you're not interested in merchant services, that's fine. I think that this would be really beneficial for you and it's really cost effective. Let me know if you're interested. And it's a way to at least get your foot in the door with somebody and, be able to start something where you don't oversell and you're trying to build a relationship, because later on they may remember that.
And it can actually help people.
For sure. Well, one of the problems there, you talk to store employees, they're more than willing. They know because they deal with the customers. But you get up in the C-suite, they're bah humbug.
Yeah, but I actually think that this is more for the mom and pop shop. Like, I think that they're the ones that, like, honestly, anybody who's got a C-suite, if they can't look at this and have some sort of forethought about it, good, sorry, on you. But the mom and pops, they're never really going to know about this stuff. And then when it does come and hit them, it's going to have a far more drastic impact on them.
Yeah.
And that's who I really think that this is for. That's why I thought, in relation to this, we play in the pool of the ISO and agent. We don't represent processors. We don't represent banks. We don't represent, large companies or mega merchants. The people that we represent deal with mom and pop, and that makes up a significant amount of the market. And
huge amount.
Yeah. And so I look at this as educational almost. It's not like a huge money maker as more as it is a rapport builder. But, it's something that, for me, it's relationship building. Like, that's how we built this firm, right? We're relationship people. And I looked at what you were saying, and I was willing to donate time and donate the opportunity to put you on this, because I think this is directly relevant to a lot of the people that we service. And I think that what you're offering is extremely cost effective and needed.
Yeah, so that, and like I say, when we're talking about the updates in law, the NPRM for EV charging stations comes out in about 3 weeks. Okay. And NEVI is requiring full accessibility to the card reader. So those fixed card readers, they're going to have tactile pin. Um, Elon Musk, Tesla, they're kind of against this.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, I know they are. I've read their comments, and but nobody else really chimed in on that. And I was like, that's really interesting. Are
Yeah,
they
but
going to
he's
try and
he's the
ignore?
guy behind all the stations, right? I mean, he's had the foresight probably behind the scenes a little bit where he knows what's going to be needed as Tesla becomes such a larger portion of the car market
Yeah,
to do this. And so, he's got that lithium battery plant out in New Mexico, the stations, like he's behind all of it. And so I it doesn't
yeah,
surprise me that he's the one that's
Mhm.
coming out saying something about it.
yeah. Well, he's not going to be able to fight it. It's going to be a thing. And Tesla can't be excluded to it. Plus, they're opening up their chargers now to Ford and GM and whoever else. I just read the news on that yesterday. So if that's the case, you have to make it. And, one of the analogies I use is, let's say you're a blind person. I'm going to bring up the blind again, or maybe you're quadriplegic. You're going to hire your driver. Okay. Let's say you own the electric vehicle and you hire a driver to drive you around, and you're responsible for payment. You don't use the app. Okay. You don't want to use a tapper. Uh, you're going to use your debit card. You have to, again, think full circle. And these things are going to be required at the EV charging stations. It's just the way it's going to be. And
So I know we're talking about the ADA. The last time we spoke about this, you were talking about California specific laws associated with this as
oh,
well.
13082. Yeah.
Do you
So,
do you see and I know you follow this very closely. Do you see some sort of it's interesting. California is generally like the flag bearer of a lot of laws that come into place. Like in
yeah.
California, we have laws associated with being a bit like a funder of any commercial funding, whether it be through a lease or a cash advance or a loan. And in order to fund money here, you have to have a license and so there's laws, and then they came out with these disclosure laws associated with if you are doing that type of transaction, then you have to give full disclosure, and here's like the form and what you have to disclose. And then New York's now come out with a law, Utah, Virginia, and it seems like California is just sort of the trailblazer with a lot of these things. I know I wanted you to talk about the California law. I apologize for cutting you off, but do you see that states will also come along? And I've never done the research on this, but I would imagine California does it because we have a larger population of disabled people, just because we
Yeah.
have a
So,
larger population. But do you see other states maybe doing the same thing?
yeah, I think so. I think the 13082 is going to be incorporated into the update with the access board, because it calls for the easy removal of the POS device from its unit, that being the mounting. Okay. And the only thing California did awkward was they excluded ATMs and fuel. And I believe in this upcoming one, those are going to be addressed where they're going to have handhelds, you know. And I think it's smart with all the shimming and skimming going on out there. I've been studying that stuff a lot lately, especially the shimming, you know. It's like,
Why don't you,
why do you think
Yeah,
Steve, tell us the
tell people,
difference? Yeah.
tell people what shimming and skimming are, because a lot of people may not know about it.
Yeah, so the skimming is a hardware focal point to uh, track your data and steal it and then sell it. It usually goes in the Lebanese loop overseas and then sold out to branches of thieves here in the United States who go around the different ATMs, and they'll hit about 10 or 12 in one night and suck out about who knows how much money, 100,000, 200,000,
And how
down.
and how does skimming happen?
Okay, so you can insert there's two ways of doing it. If you're talking unattended, there's in the card insertion, there's kind of a reader thing they have in it, and you're never going to know it. And then they're able to track your pin too because it's going to be on camera. The other thing that's been happening in fuel tanks, these are known as mechanics. That's what they call them down in Florida. They're able to get into a fuel pump and not attach directly to the card reader and get your information that way, but it pulls it from the back end off the chips on the processing board. It's insanely
Basically hacking
wild.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good at it. And so every time they find a way, if you see Krebs Security write something, just know that Krebs is telling them, okay, you guys got to go next level. We got you here. And they're going to go next level.
So then what is shimming?
Shimming is that internal part I was just talking about.
Okay, so the skimming's external, the shimming's internal, and
Internal.
and EMV doesn't protect against that.
No, it helps it.
Wow.
It helps it.
I didn't
Okay.
know that.
So the original concept around EMV security, nothing's 100%, right? When it comes to security. So
No, not when there's people trying to hack it.
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah,
and exactly. But and then if you're talking about the security of the POS device in a store being locked down, PCI is always saying, lock it down, lock it down. Again, what's the purpose of handhelds? They're so common, they're everywhere, but they lock the handhelds down. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
either to a certain degree because EMV was supposed to like take away the data storage, and so it takes away to a certain degree, it takes away the opportunity if somebody did take a physical device that they would be able to do anything with it. Like now, without any storage on the device, it makes it like a less of a concern to me.
Yeah. So, we'll see. I had a neighbor get ripped off last October, $30,000. Wells Fargo branch outside wall-mounted ATM had a skimmer on it, and he was lucky. He got his money back.
Yeah,
That's rare.
trust me, dealing with a bank, right? Yeah. Try to get money from a bank. Good job that you didn't put in it. Yeah.
He got real lucky. But the thing with the upcoming rule changes, regulations, these are going to be taken very serious by the ADA. It's not going to be one of those overlooked things. It's going to be as prominent as parking.
When do those go in effect?
We don't know yet because the NPRMs haven't been published yet. The NPRMs, once they have their comment period, they'll come out, which is typically a month, maybe 45 days max. They'll come back out and say, okay, final rule. They might just throw it out there and not tell you. It could be very quick. It could take a few months. We don't know.
Yeah, I've been through that process in other areas, and I've seen it take even longer, but it depends on the lobby groups that are out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't that involved. The ANPRM for this only had 81, I think, comments.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, 90% of it was just by a regular person, not a company, and then some of the big advocacy groups in accessibility weighed in. And like I say, Tesla weighed in on it too, because they knew accessibility was coming out. DOT hired the Access Board to write their NPRM to do all the studies and figure it out for them, for the NEVI, And what gets me is you have all these EV charging stations. They want a chunk of that $7.5 billion, right?
Yeah,
They
of
want
course.
that federal money, but they don't want to abide by federal accessibility law. Make that make sense.
Yeah, I look, I'm in wholesale agreement with you. I don't, it's interesting. I don't see a world where you can strip away a lot of regulation. I don't think that this is something that you're ever going to strip away in our society unless, government fails.
Sure. And hopefully not,
I think that
right?
this is
That's
one of those things. Yeah, I think that this is one of those things where, at least in America, you'll see, some form, as long as it's not abused, some form of protection of like an actual protected class. I mean, people that
if it's enforced,
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I work with a group in DC, UCID, and they're the power players in ADA, globally. And just to give you an idea, last night I got a text from one of my team out there, and she sent a picture. She's at the UN this week, and she was teasing me because I just had a Zoom with this guy about a month ago, a meeting, and she's sitting there at dinner or something with him, takes pictures, texts it to me last night, and it's the policy for ADA for Walmart Corporation. You know, and I'm going, man, Victor gets around. one day he's on a Zoom with me, the next he's at the UN for the what they call a Convention of Rights on Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, and that's going on this week there. I was invited to that, but I just don't want to go to New York with all those sky problems, Have you seen that? All the smog, fog, fire.
I think it's actually dissipated now. I was.
Oh, how's it?
Yeah, I think so. I think the late last week was the worst of it.
Oh, okay. Well, still. Anyway, but like I say, the laws are very detailed. It's assistive technology. I want to go back to that term. There's a whole Assistive Technology Act in play as well. So we're talking about an industry here that Visa says, if you're going to accept our card, man, and use our network, you have to abide by accessibility laws in the country in which your device is deployed. Why doesn't Verifone or Ingenico listen to that? Why doesn't PAX listen to that?
Well, I think that's a really good question. Who's supposed to educate them and why? I
have educated them.
I get it, but if you don't have anybody standing, look, there's the carrot and the stick, man. And and there's a lot of people, if it's a change, I mean, look at how long the card issuers resisted EMV, right? I mean, like the cost of issuing the card was the dominant factor in delaying that for so long. And I can't remember exactly what the difference was. I mean, the magstripe was like cents to produce. And then when they went to the chip technology, it went up to like 60 cents or something like that. I mean, at least initially. And I think it was that initial added expense that was going to go into issuing a new card. And today, like, cards are so disposable. Like, I mean, just ask my partner, James Huber. He has to get new cards all the time.
Hi, James.
Yeah, exactly. That's an inside joke. But
cards, huh?
No, it's an inside joke. His wife shops online a lot. And so that increased expense really, it pushed off EMV for at least 2 to 3 years back in the early 2010s. And I can see somebody like Ingenico and Verifone looking at this, even an easy modification. What I don't understand is why they don't partner with somebody like you to say, hey, in addition, here's some regulation that exists, and here's some regulation that's coming out, and here's a very simple solution for you that we have in partnering with Taylor POS. That's what kind of blows my mind, is that there's not some sort of seeing the like not looking at you as somebody that's being disruptive, but more looking at you as a partner that's solutions oriented. That's what I don't understand.
You've already done the groundwork. You have the product already ready to go.
Yeah, it's been ready to go. It abides by every assistive technology rule there is in the ADA. It abides by the requirements of PCI in the PTS POI, and it's honoring the acceptance guide from Visa. How do you go wrong doing everything right?
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So, but the way the industry really works is Verifone has their buddy mount making company that they send everybody to. Ingenico has their mount making buddy they send everybody to. PAX has their mount making buddy they send everybody to.
But are they promoting it? That would be my question. Like, are they educating and promoting?
No, they don't know. They could know. I know more. Oh, man. Every time I say this, I feel like Trump. I know more about this than anybody in the world. Because Trump's always saying that, right? But it's true. And when you have the very individual George Bush Sr. appointed to create the ADA, who wrote 504 and 508 and ICT, working with you directly, do you not have the largest database of knowledge in the world working with you?
Yeah,
You know,
look, this
You
is,
think so?
and it's so simple, right? I mean,
yes.
that's the thing that's
Yeah.
probably frustrating from your perspective is it's just really, really simple. And
Yeah, it's simple. I took it down. I've got it down to Barney level. It took years to be able to go down to Barney level, you know?
Sure.
And
you might have to explain that to some of our listeners.
oh, okay, yeah, there's going to be
Barney
younger
who?
audience.
Yeah, I actually watched a lot of cable TV growing up, so I'm aware of who that is.
Yeah, Barney was big. Just Google Barney purple suit, and you can watch videos on Barney. Um, the they always say, write like second grade, but sometimes you can't help but have to go a little bit higher because you're talking to IT people too, and you're talking to C-suite people, and then you're talking to lawyers. You're talking to just a whole spectrum when it comes to this. Well, Bob, what do you recommend? You're my lawyer. Bob doesn't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think most people know,
Yeah.
and that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons that we wanted to have you
And that's
on was
that's
because,
okay. This is the birth of that.
yeah, and that's like I really believe. Look, there's a lot of laws that get passed.
Yeah.
Some of them I think are worthwhile, some of them I don't. But in the end, it's always the law, and if it's
Yeah.
going to be enforced, I think it's better to know about it than to not know about it.
Yeah.
So that was really the drive to have you on here, was just to really bring awareness to this, because I do believe it is something that is going to come to the forefront. And I also believe it's going to be a place where there is significant litigation associated with compliance.
Yeah. There will be, and let me tell you, I think I just had my fourth call within 3 various groups at the Pentagon. Okay. Those calls have already taken place. And, there's a lot of exchanges, a lot of commissaries, and so there's wheels turning.
Yeah. Like Chris said, regulation's on its way.
Yeah, I don't. I
Yeah.
mean, when I look at government, like the idea of small government, that's like a pipe dream. In my lifetime, the expansion
Yeah.
of the federal apparatus
Yeah.
is gigantic. I mean, all you have to do is look at you brought up a good point. Look at the military budget and how large that is today, and how large even though it's been scaled back to a certain degree, government's not going to get smaller. The population's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, unless there's a cataclysmic climate event that really alters things, I don't see government ever getting smaller in my lifetime, and I'm hoping I've got a significant amount of that left. We'll see, but I think it's just really important that there's some sort of acknowledgement and like a light to be shined on this particular subject. And look, I'm not going to say it's the most like spicy cha-cha, like really get you going, but it's one of those things that's just going to be there. And I think, I mean, I was amazed that I hadn't really stumbled upon it before. And that's, like, I'm glad that you're on here, Steve, to actually educate and give people some awareness.
And I
I
think
mean, look at
advocating
that.
too for people that, don't have
Simple.
a lot of advocates out there.
This is
there
simple.
you go. Yep.
I got it down to Barney level,
Yeah.
and
And installation should be pretty simple. That's the thing. It's how much is a unit that you sell? Retail. You give us retail price. You don't have to tell me.
If it's retail, we've been pulling them out at $329, but also consider 50% tax credit brings it down to around 150 something.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
that's great. And that's the thing. Anytime you're going to have a mounted device, it's going to have accessibility, and I don't see those going away in the next 20 years.
No, and these do cost a little more to make than the average because it's got details, within the springing, the way we do the the backside mounting, it matters. The pressures, the Loctite amount we have to put in is actually very exact. It's weird.
If
There's just
if I was a
little things.
salesperson that wanted to order some of these to, you actually use this as some sort of sales presentation opportunity to talk to somebody, how would they go about ordering these or getting a hold of you? I mean, I think that's really important for them to know.
Yeah, just go to taylorpos.com and call me or use the contact form. Usually I get calls from, those guys that redo the parking, they paint and all that. I get calls from those guys all the time. And I don't know how they find me, but it's usually the stores that they're doing work for are being sued.
Hmm.
And so they go out in the hunt to find an actual accessible mount, and I'm it. That's all that's out there. There's a couple other companies that have tried. They say it's helpful with wheelchair, and they didn't read anything. They didn't read the regs. They didn't read the requirements. They just didn't.
Absolutely.
So,
well, Steve, we hope that this podcast in some small way helps to get the word out there even more. I'm sure Chris and your conversations with Global's clients and whatnot is going to also help continue to educate and bring this subject up. I'm going to give you the last word today, Steve. Chris, did you have any final questions or any thoughts?
No, I appreciate you being on. This is actually the second take on this thing with Steve.
Yeah.
We were new in I think you were the first podcast, and
Yeah.
I think we had some technical difficulties with it, and we were unable to save the podcast. So we're not podcast. I mean, it says payment.
We're not experts.
No,
right?
not in the podcast part. The payments part, yes, but not the podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
So we appreciate you doing a second take on this, Steve. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. If I had anything to say, scrap here. Let me end with this. The view on standard mounting that you see today is literally considered discriminatory mounted point of sale systems out there. Think about that. And it's not that they're being intentionally discrimination, they're not. But once they know that there is a fix for it, then they purposely become discriminatory.
Excellent.
Because they're not fixing it, right?
Yeah, I actually think that's a good perspective for people, like when you know something and you willfully ignore it. And I mean, it's one thing if you've got to change your entire storefront to make it accessible. It's another thing if all you have to do is buy a mount. And with simple instructions, install it.
$50 and
I mean, it just makes total sense to do it.
Yeah.
And a cashier can install it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I'm the most non-handy guy around, and I could do this.
I went to a friend's store, and she had to go around back and then come back out. I installed a mount on her counter in under a minute, and I had her device locked down onto the stand. And she goes, "When did that happen?" I go, "Between you walking in here." Now, if you're going to do that for a tier 1 or tier 2 level, merchant level, right? The big boys, a little bit different thing. But for a simple countertop, and it was glass also. And I showed a picture of it to a friend of mine. He goes, "How did you get that thing to stand on glass?" I said, 3M dual side tape.
Yeah. No, look, that's the thing. I look at this and it's almost like when you're in the checkout line and there's accessories there and you're like pushing accessories in your face as far as, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this. It's, and you look at it, it's enticing because it has, some sort of either like satisfying a need or a want.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely in that category if I'm a merchant services salesperson of, hey, this is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. It gets you in any door, and it gets the conversation started. And
Excellent.
If I were to go sell merchant services again, I used to have leads. They all came to me. I never had to go outbound in the way back when. But if I were to go out there on the road today and hitting stores, I'm carrying one of these with me and starting the conversation with ADA, get into the payments, get into the equipment, and don't do it the other way because they get hit every day by, we could lower your rates. Would you like to get solar while we're talking about your merchant services? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Well, maybe something will start after this podcast.
Yeah,
Steve,
sure
it was
hope
a
so.
real pleasure having you on today. Everyone,
you.
please, we would love for you to go check out taylorpos.com. Steve, again, it was a real pleasure. Chris, thank you for being with us today.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast. New episodes, first and third Thursdays. If you're interested in learning more about PEP and how Global Legal Law Firm may be able to assist you, please visit us at globallegallawfirm.com. To schedule a free consultation, give us a call at 888-846-8901 or email us at pep@attorneygl.com. And once again, thank you for listening.
1, 2